Well, thanks for joining us, viewers, this morning on the Thursday edition of the Morning Spring on Western Spring Television. It's good to have you join us again. You know what we do for you on this program? It's to keep you abreast of the happenings around you in the socio-economic space and the political scene of Nigeria. And you know how the segments are on the show? We bring you the newspaper review, bring you an interview segment, and then Emmanuel brings you the trends and what's happening around you. Thanks for joining us again. You can follow us on all our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can watch us live on channel 190 on the DTT platform of Star Times, or you can live stream our shows on YouTube at Western Spring Television. My name is Temitope Ajijola. Thanks for joining us again, and we'll be back with the papers after this break. Please stay with us.
Arrested, affected, sound, found. What do we see? What do we say? Flowing from a spring. A fact A to Z. Check and confirm. Eva is pounding current events. Traveling down from the business gist to the globally arising happenings, to the sports news, to the bittersweet infos. Guided transmission, even diffusion, vast and fast, detailed facts are fled. Within seconds, nuggets of words that flew across borders are fired. Stories short and long, wrapped in bundles of words, broken and dissected as it is, except misheard. This is the news as it is.
This iconic African presents the narrative of a man destined to exert an imperishable global influence in Western education. His was a story of a freeborn, captured and sold into slavery. He was born in Oshogun, a native Yoruba village near Iseyin in Okeogun axis of southwest Nigeria. Samuel Ajayi Crowther was the foundation student of Fora Bay College, Sierra Leone, the foremost university where the pioneer set of native Africans were educated. Samuel Ajayi Crowther's greatest contribution to humanity was his translation of the Holy Bible into the Yoruba language. The man who authored the Yoruba dictionary was also credited with the translation of English classic hymns into Yoruba and the Ekwere languages. Samuel Ajayi Crowther's private residence in Badagry, incidentally the first story building in Nigeria, is an archival museum dedicated to the memory of Africa's first bishop. Western Spring Television identifies Samuel Ajayi Crowther as a watershed character in history.
Turn it up! It's the Wild Wild West. And Western Spring Television is pulling out all the stops to make sure that you don't miss out on every of the fun and happenings around you. Yup, we've got you covered because your girls got all the juiciest tidbits and entertainment news from around the world. Cross over to the chocolatey side of entertainment. Join me, Chocolate Cassie, on Eccentric as we take you into every bit of the juiciest news, fashion, music, movie updates, and other trending conversations. Together on the show, we'll get personal with your favorite celebrities via phone call, Zoom, or even live here in the studio. Eccentric will be showing on your TV screen on Western Spring Television, channel 190, only on StarTimes.
Born Jeremiah Oyeni Obafemi on March 6, 1905, Obafemi Awolowo was a prime architect of Nigeria's independence and most consummate advocate of free education and social welfare in Africa's most populous nation. Erudite politician, thinker and philosopher, Awo was fondly addressed by associates and political colleagues, brought his unique attributes to bear on governance in the defunct Western region. He administered as leader of government business and the premier between 1955 and 1958. Obafemi Awolowo's premiership witnessed pioneering in multi-sectoral policy initiatives and execution. The Western region under his administration paraded several enviable records. First television station in Africa, first real estate in Nigeria, first high-rise building in Nigeria, first modern sports stadium in Nigeria, first agricultural settlement in Nigeria, first modern civil service secretariat in Nigeria, and first industrial estate in Nigeria. His face is on 100 Naira denomination as a mark of honor for his distinguished services to his country. Western Spring Television identifies Obafemi Awolowo as a major character in history.
Sports is a culture on its own. It has its own language, its own people, with their own way of life. The world of sports is never void of action.
All right, welcome back to the show, Morning Spring on Western Spring Television. Ladies first, as they say these days, we're trying to, make it look very, very ladylike. I'm trying to make top some sort of internal arrangement, just to make her feel. Welcome. My name is Emmanuel Lujadigele, and then we have the papers for you already. A lot of things, a lot of talking points really from the national dailies this morning. We start as usual with the Punch newspaper. The Punch newspaper is what we start with this morning. And the banner headline says, 26 days to go. Outrage as Senate approves Buhari's 22.7 trillion naira extra budgetary spending. Fresh borrowing from CBN illegal, suspicious as NECA LCCI economist. 22.7 trillion naira extra budgetary spending to raise public debts to 69 trillion naira. This is extreme. It is unbelievable that, considering our woes, our economic woes at the moment, the presidency and the Senate have gone this direction.
Yeah.
There's really little to what you can say to them because it's been done. And deals like this, you don't hear it in the papers, you don't hear it in the news when they are making the moves. You just hear, okay, they've approved this, they've done that, but it's scary that our public debt will be at 69 trillion naira. Really, it's very scary.
It is. They seem to be oblivious to the realities of things. And the fact that I was saying yesterday about how we make last minute decisions on appointments and borrowings is really not good for our economy at all. It isn't. 22.7 trillion naira extra budgetary spending. And this is for what? We do not know. We just know that we are in debt again. And there's an $800 million somewhere that has been borrowed. And what it's supposed to be used for has been suspended, and we don't know what will happen to that. So we just hear, figures about, our indebtedness, and it keeps growing by the day. And this particular government that is borrowing this is living in 26 days, and we don't know what the money is for. If it's for an outstanding, service, or it's for something that is supposed to, be in the pipeline for now. We don't know. But we know that, let it be, in our minds, that we have an extra 22.7 trillion naira that the federal government has put us into again, another debt.
It is very funny, and sometimes it's quite, I don't know the word. It leaves you speechless, this country that we are, some of the things that happen. But then we hopefully there will be.
And the fact that they seem to deem it fit to tell us the figures, but not the process of, getting to this point, and then what the money is supposed to be spent on is really bad. We seem not to have the right to know what it will be spent on, but we know that we have 22.7 trillion naira borrowed, and we're supposed to just keep mum and look.
Well, there's really nothing you can do as Nigerians, apart from just talking and talking. The deed has been done. We can't pour the milk back into the broken bottle. Well, Agenda 2050, federal government projects $33,000 per capita GDP, as on page 30 of the Punch newspaper.
Then how are we supposed to do that, Emmanuel? How? The federal government says they're not responsible for job creation. And who's supposed to create the jobs that will earn us that? So how are we supposed to do that?
Well, don't worry.
Yes, when we are very close to 2050,
we'll realize.
Planning.
Yes, we'll realize how all that goes. There's always a God factor that politicians like to mention. To tell you, by God's grace, God willing, we'll sort it out. My question is: Does God come down from the heavens and take your hand and lead you through? Yes, He does that. He leads you through. Besides still waters,
God has given us some certain things so that we would not ask Him
common sense
for some things. Exactly.
Yes.
And so if we cannot use that, I doubt if He's going to come down to help us do anything.
Or maybe send some angels.
Okay.
Or we will have another Jesus.
All right.
Well, APC and NWC fails to zone National Assembly leadership seats, page 21, looking like some
dead end to the meeting.
Dead end, yes. And
they said they were going to meet yesterday.
And the implications are yet to be, known. Hope it doesn't snowball into some sort of crisis.
It means that there must have been disagreements in that meeting, and they were not able to
resolve them.
Yes.
They were not able to reach a consensus as to who gets what zone gets what.
Yes.
Well, I still don't see the need or the reason for all of that back and forth on a position or positions like that. It's just very simple. There should be some internal mechanism to arrive at all of those conversations. But it's politics, and most times interests do not align, and you cannot force people to align their interests together. Well, that's that. So the story of the Punch newspaper: police arrest Ocean twins for cultism. On page 5, Senate proposes life jail for unlawful explosive makers. Page 15. Above the nameplate, some good news finally. Sudan, 376 stranded Nigerians airlifted from Egypt. Page 15. Wow, we wish them a big welcome, and hope that they are able to get reintegrated into the Nigerian society. And the federal government discos from national grid over that. Page 19. This is one of the funniest stories for me. The people who are distributing electricity have been disconnected from the national grid because they are indebted to the federal government. But it couldn't be not their fault, mostly because there's the large-scale energy theft. Sometimes when the discos come out to say that this is how much energy theft affects them, you never know until you begin to, for instance, if you steal energy, if you bypass your meter, if you buy 5,000 naira worth of electricity, that's about 76 units now. You could use it for 2 weeks. If you bypass your meter for 2 weeks, that means you've consumed 5,000. And there are people who have been bypassing their meters for a very long time. So if you accumulate all of that, it's really, but the federal government disconnecting them, well, it's within its right to do that. You can't do business out of pity, you know, but we hope that Nigerians too pay their dues and ensure that these discos are restored so they can because there are people who fall within the area of those who steal the energy, who have been disconnected from the national grid too. So we hope that the innocent.
But there are lots of things tied to this electricity distribution.
Yes, a lot.
And the fact that you have accumulated debt on your meters, on new meters, is also something to be worried about. We don't know why this is happening, but
I experienced that too personally.
Yes, and balance, you know, there's supposed to be a balance somewhere. The people are at fault, and sometimes you cannot exclude the distribution companies too from all of these faults.
I mean, we had to pay 6,800 for on a meter. We couldn't vend new units because we had to pay that amount. It's quite funny.
Yes.
Strike resident doctor says, say federal government threat annoying. Yes, and that it should be annoying to anybody. I mean, how do you say that their demands or their strike, whatever, is absurd? You know, some of those statements are quite insensitive. Yeah, and of course, should be treated as annoying. But that's all on the Punch newspaper.
Okay, quickly to the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. Speakership, opposition intensifies plot to upstage APC. On speakership, opposition intensifies plot to upstage APC. And the writers says we are more than prepared. That's still from the opposition. And it's a fruitless move, says the chief whip. Will abide by ruling party's decision. Task Force Forum says they can succeed, but, you know, there are still some things that we do not know. And that's coming from the analysts. We're working on consensus. That's according to Adamu. And all of this are on page 4 of the Daily Trust. You can get more of this particular story and the different angles to it on page 4 of the Daily Trust newspaper. And just below that, we can see pictures of people, you know, going aboard a plane that it was supposed to lift them. And that's on Sudan. And Sudan crisis, Nigerian evacuees airlifted from Egypt without luggage. Sudan crisis, Nigerian evacuees airlifted from Egypt without luggage. And that's on page 30 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Probably their luggages would, you know, meet them here in Nigeria. And to the bottom,
I don't think anybody's luggage is coming back. If you were airlifted without luggage, I mean, that's where it ends. Yes.
All right. So on page 6, Press Freedom Day, IPI sets agenda for Tinubu's government. IPI sets agenda for Tinubu's government, and that's on page 6. And on to page 23, Lagos.
Arrested, affected, sound, found. What do we see? What do we say? Flowing from a spring. A fact A to Z. Check and confirm. Ever is...
All right, welcome back to the show. Apologies for the loss of audio there. We're still bringing you stories from the Daily Trust newspaper this morning, Timothy.
All right, and just below the nameplate, Ways and Means, Senate okays Buhari's 22.7 trillion naira loan request. And that's on page 4 of the Daily Trust. And on page 34, BON nominates Trust TV for Broadcasting Awards. BON nominates Trust TV for Broadcasting Awards. And on page 23, Buhari launches Nigeria Agenda 2050, targets over 150 million jobs. Buhari launches Nigeria Agenda 2050, targets over 150 million jobs. Well, it's sort of ironic. Yesterday, you said you're not responsible for job creation. And now today, you're looking at 150 million jobs by 2050. It's a miracle.
It's a very big miracle. Very big miracle. Well, let's move on to the Guardian newspaper. The Guardian this morning has a banner headline: Nigeria to spend 40 years repaying controversial 23.72 trillion naira CBN overdraft to federal government. That's on page 6. You see the picture of the Senate President Ahmed Lawan there, President Muhammadu Buhari, Godwin Emefiele, and Zainab Ahmed. Page 6 of the Guardian is where you get more on that story. News page 5. Corrupt officials sabotaging passport issuance, Aregbesola alleges. There's been so much conversation around what's happening at the passport offices of Nigerian Immigration Service. You know, a lot of people saying that it takes weeks and months to get their passports. It's difficult. You have to pay this, you have to pay that. If you don't know anyone, it is even more difficult. And you begin to wonder. But he's saying now that corrupt officials, are you saying that we have them in all the offices across the country? Because all the complaints really come from all around the country.
Yes. At times you have people coming from Lagos, Ogun State to Osun State here. I mean, you meet them at the offices and they say, you just cannot, afford to stay in those offices and expect that you're going to get your passport in due time, because the queue is even long already. And that's for months on end. People already have appointments for different dates and you just can't afford to stay there if you know you have a deadline to beat to get your passport. And then even here in Osun, the situation is quite tight. And then I don't know of other parts of Nigeria, and I know that's how it's going to be. But you can see that truly there are some sorts of, exploitation where you have, when you need to beg for favors. And I cannot put it past the fact that people also like to, boycott the proper procedure of things and would want to just cut corners and get things done fast. And that's how exploitation comes. And in no time, these people think it is, what they're supposed to do. It becomes an entitlement. Yes. And then they always ask for it. And you have no choice sometimes but to give it just to get what you want. But the fact remains that it is difficult now to get passport as opposed to, several years back, when you could just get it within, some very few days.
Well, we hope that they're able to clean up the system and make life easy for people.
Yeah.
Business page 18, NASIMA CPPE lament worsening state of economy. And on page 3, Senate cannot stop demolition at Lagos Airport, says federal government. Despite probes, official corruption, undermining building control enforcement, and that's on the analysis page 4 of The Guardian. Police officers' families to vacate 25 barracks for renovation. The Metro, page 9 of The Guardian. And NAS leadership, Tinubu the first zoning decision after May 29. News, page 6. Project refund, I owe you nothing. Tinubu tells Wike. Page 27. And that's what's making the rounds. It's been like that since yesterday's. Yes. Some person saying that Tinubu cut Wike down to size yesterday, or some other things. He said that you find out on the trends and how Nigerians reacted to those things. Talking about how I am your president, someone will be the one responding to you and your banter. I'm like, oh wow, that's some level of letting Wike know his place. And then it speaks to the fact that after this election cycle and inauguration, Wike may just be as irrelevant as the other person. Yes, just an ordinary person. Yeah. And now Tinubu the first zoning decision after May 29. I think this explains why the Punch reported that there was no zoning at their meeting. So after May 29th, when it's been sworn in, that's when they want to zone.
You should know, I am just imagining what that means. Is this about the fact that he will want to use veto or and decide things, or that's when he feels that he will be in the position to be able to talk to people or to those people?
I think his words will carry more weight than...
Yes.
Well, that's that on the papers. Do we have one more paper?
Yes, The Nation is here. The Nation newspaper says, I won't marginalize any part of Nigeria. Tinubu pledges. President-elect hails Wike for believing in justice, fairness. But Harcourt stands still for Asiwaju. And it's, right there. And the quote here is saying, I will not marginalize any region, but will leave legacy projects across the length and breadth of Nigeria. I'm hoping that those words are not just words, and for the first time it is going to happen. So, but over time, some people seem to be getting more benefits of democracy than others. But to just the right side of that story, Russia-Ukraine war, escalation likely. Kremlin claims drone attack from Kiev, and that is
another twist in the war
of the Ukraine-Russian war. And to the bottom strip of the paper, Labour Party threatens lawmakers elect with sanction over party crisis. That is on page 6 of the Nation newspaper. And to the mid strip of the paper, Senate joins in leniency pleas for Ekweremadu, and that is also on page 6 of the Nation.
Tomorrow.
Yes, the judgment. All right, and on page 4, second term, Lagos raises panel of 22. That's on page 4 of the Nation. And just below the nameplate, 40% of savings in Nigerian banks now in US dollars, says IMF. And that is another story there on page 4 of the Nation newspaper. And another story just beside that, zoning of National Assembly top posts. APC targets consensus. And the writers say party to persuade members elect, NWC closes ranks. And then
still targeting consensus. It will be difficult to I see it as a difficult task because there are people who feel that they are best qualified. And it's going to be hard to ask them to wait another 4 years. You don't know what's going to happen in the next 4 years. You even get your party ticket, if you'll be alive, if you'll be able to get, if another leadership will come and say, okay, but another party will be in majority, lot of permutations.
Uncertainties as well. And just above the nameplate, Minister blames NIS for passport issuance crisis. That is on page 6 of the Nation newspaper. And still to page 5, Labour disrupts Owerri bound flights in Lagos, Abuja, others. Labour disrupts Owerri bound flights in Lagos, Abuja, others. And another story where we can see Abike Dabiri, Senator K's restructuring of 22.7 trillion naira on budgeted loans. And she's there on the Sudan story on page 5. Sudan, 2 aircraft fly back, 376 Nigerians. Sudan, 2 aircraft fly back, 376 Nigerians. So only 376 Nigerians so far have been airlifted from Egypt. We're hoping that they'll be here, safely. That's all the story
on the papers
that we have on the Nation newspaper and on the newspaper review segment today.
Well, that's all. That's the papers. We'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll be talking to our guest. Stay with us.
Arrested, affected, sound, found. What do we see? What do we say? Flowing from a spring. A fact A to Z. Check and confirm. Ever expounding current events. Traveling down from the business gist to the globally arising happenings, to the sports news, to the bittersweet infos. Guided transmission, even diffusion, vast and fast, detailed facts are fled. Within seconds, nuggets of words that flew across borders are fired. Stories short and long, wrapped in bundles of words, broken and dissected as it is, except misheard. This is the news as it is.
This iconic African presents the narrative of a man destined to exert an imperishable global influence in Western education. His was a story of a freeborn, captured and sold into slavery. He was born in Oshogun, a native Yoruba village near Iseyin in Okeogun axis of southwest Nigeria. Samuel Ajayi Crowther was the foundation student of Fora Bay College, Sierra Leone, the foremost university where the pioneer set of native Africans were educated. Samuel Ajayi Crowther's greatest contribution to humanity was his translation of the Holy Bible into the Yoruba language. The man who authored the Yoruba dictionary was also credited with the translation of English classic hymns into Yoruba and the Ekwere languages. Samuel Ajayi Crowther's private residence in Badagry, incidentally the first story building in Nigeria, is an archival museum dedicated to the memory of Africa's first bishop. Western Spring Television identifies Samuel Ajayi Crowther as a watershed character in history.
Turn it up! It's the Wild Wild West. And Western Spring Television is pulling out all the stops to make sure that you don't miss out on every of the fun and happenings around you. Yup, we've got you covered because your girl got all the juiciest tidbits and entertainment news from around the world. Cross over to the chocolatey side of entertainment. Join me, Chocolate Cassie, on Eccentric as we take you into every bit of the juiciest news, fashion, music, movie updates, and other trending conversations. Together on the show, we'll get personal with your favorite celebrities via phone call, Zoom, or even live here in the studio. Eccentric will be shown on your TV screen on Western Spring Television, channel 190, only on StarTimes.
Born Jeremiah Oyeni Obafemi on March 6, 1905, Obafemi Awolowo was a prime architect of Nigeria's independence and most consummate advocate of free education and social welfare in Africa's most populous nation. Erudite politician, thinker and philosopher, Awo was fondly addressed by associates and political colleagues, brought his unique attributes to bear on governance in the defunct Western region. He administered as leader of government business and the premier between 1955 and 1958. Obafemi Awolowo's premiership witnessed pioneering in multi-sectoral policy initiatives and execution. The Western region under his administration paraded several enviable records. First television station in Africa, first real estate in Nigeria, first high-rise building in Nigeria, first modern sports stadium in Nigeria, first agricultural settlement in Nigeria, first modern civil service secretariat in Nigeria, and first industrial estate in Nigeria. His face is on 100 naira denomination as a mark of honor for his distinguished services to his country. Western Spring Television identifies Obafemi Awolowo as a major character in history.
Sports is a culture on its own. It has its own language, its own people, with their own way of life. The world of sports is never void of actions, stories, dramas.
Welcome back to the show. It's still Morning Spring on Western Spring Television, reaching you live from StarTimes channel 190 on the DTT platform. And you can follow the conversation on all our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, where you can subscribe to us and follow live and also catch up on episodes of your programs. We're joined live in the studio this morning by Comrade Ayo Ologun, who is a journalist, a human rights activist, a public speaker, and of course, a socio-political commentator. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
And also, we understand yesterday was your birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Belated birthday there.
Thank you very much.
All right. So yesterday was World Press Freedom Day. And the theme was shaping future rights, trying to link the freedom of the press as a driver for fundamental human rights. But let me ask you, how free exactly is the press?
Well, it depends on how we want to look at it. The freedom of the press, I can think of it from two angles. Is the choice of the pressmen themselves to be free, and then how much of allowance is given to media men within the socio-political space to be free. If you talk about the freedom of the press as it concerns journalists, broadcasters themselves, there are a lot of them that inhibit themselves by their choice. When you talk about self-development and you talk about understanding the job, a lot of people get on the job and they want to do the same thing that they've done day in, day out, 10, 15 years after. So for such people, even without being inhibited, they are limiting themselves in terms of experience, in terms of exposure, in terms of content. But when you talk about the freedom of the press in terms of socio-political space, a lot of media houses nowadays, unlike it used to be in some years past, are owned by people who are politically inclined. And when such happens, you see the influence of the proprietors of such radio, TV, or print medium getting clear in the kind of broadcast that comes out from that station, and how much of the opposing side of the choice of the proprietors is allowed on there. So when that happens, if you are unfortunate, in quotes now, to be someone who is free-minded, and you get employed in such a place where the influence of the proprietor is political and is overbearing, then there are a lot of issues that comes into how much of your work you get to do without being inhibited or without being stopped or without being influenced by the choice of divide that the proprietor chooses to be. That's on one side. On another side is the choice of the political class, irrespective of political parties now, to suppress the press. You've seen situations, I'm sure it doesn't happen here, but it happens a lot of time in the print media, whereby journalists on the feed do their work conscientiously. They gather story, they do follow up, and they are ready to dish out the news as should be. And the political class will reach out to the editors at the headquarters and tell you that, look, that story must not fly. Some money changes hands, or in some cases not even money, influences, maybe by favors that have been done over the years, and they tell you that, look, that story is against me, it must not fly, or even if it must fly, embellish it in this way or the other way. And when such news makes it to the press, even the reporter himself will ask himself, this is not what I wrote. This was not my line of thought. Of course, the buck stops at the table of the editor, where you won't be for decisions to be taken. So I think these are some of the issues that inhibit the freedom of the press, which are issues that have to be continually discussed until we're able to overcome some of these hindrances in the media space.
All right. So the theme now looks at the link between press freedom and human rights. How much of human rights activists do people expect journalists to be?
Well, it depends on a lot of people mistake some of those things, and that's why someone like me always have issues, because I share from both backgrounds. I'm a journalist by practice, and also I'm an human rights activist by choice. And when some of these things happens, a lot of people want to force media men to do the work of an activist. And in most cases, the duty of a journalist is to report. You don't create stories. That's the way it is said. Journalists are not meant to create stories. Journalists are meant to report issues, to report incidences, and write stories around it. But you see situations whereby things happen, and when even there are no empirical evidences for the journalist to refer to or to back it up, people will tell you, oh, it's because they've been paid. Oh, it's because they do not like the face of the person involved. Oh, it's because their proprietor is this, the proprietor is that. It should have been written this way, it should have been said this way. When in actual fact, that did not happen. So you don't expect a journalist to create story. The duty of a journalist is to report stories, to report events, and report actions. So you don't expect him to sit in one corner and bring his own mindset. And that happens a lot anyway, where journalists bring in their own opinion, their own biases, their own mindset into the kind of reportage that they made. But by training, the duty of a journalist stops as reporting what you see and what you can verify. It is not the duty of an human rights activist to project further, to look further into the intentions that makes an action happen. Maybe it concerns journalists if you want to look at it from the angle of follow-up stories. Oh, an incident has happened, you want to follow it up, interview people involved, and all of that. But that is within the limitation of the journalist. It is the duty of an activist now to look at the intentions that brought about the action. In most cases, journalists even preempt actions. I mean, human rights activists preempt actions. For example, the government is coming up with a policy. A journalist will not go on the street and react before that journalist is promulgated. A journalist will wait until that kind of policy is promulgated and it comes to action, and then begin to report its effects on the people. But human rights activists can project into, oh, if this is allowed to happen, it will affect the people in this way, affect the people in this way. Okay, let's stop it. So when you begin to confuse the two, it brings unwholesome ideas about who people are and what they are not. But we must understand that as much as it is the duty of journalists to help propagate and instill the right of the people in such a way that the government and everybody concerned understand that this is the things that should be done, we should not expect a journalist to do the work of an human rights activist or expect him to create stories where none does not exist.
All right, let's talk about the fact that the nation has, their own broadcast mediums, and then even the states as well. And sometimes we see, their influence coming from all of these, angles. What do you say about that fact? Should states still continue that kind of operation? And is it supposed to be a right practice?
There's nothing wrong in states, whether the federal or the state level, having broadcast houses. I think the problem lies with those who are professionally employed. I use the word professionally because in most cases, there are people that work in such stations that are not professionals. They get into media houses by the influence of their political godfathers in the name of let's find job for the boys. You see a lot of people working in radio and TV stations that have no business there. But for those who are professionally employed to work in state broadcast stations, I put the blame on them because most of the time they deviate from the path of professionalism to satisfy the paymaster. I've been privileged to work in a state-owned station, and I understand the mindset of the people that work there. They want to tell you, or they want to assume, at least by what I saw for the few years that I was there, the mindset is, look, we are a jeep. It's all government in power. So if we are here today promulgating the ideas of this one, the moment that government loses power, another one comes in, they begin to sing the song of that one. In most cases, they even stop the agenda of an opposing political party different from that of the government, party in government, from flying on their broadcast stations. And these are not professional. The duty of a media house is first, especially news media, because of course there are media houses that are into entertainment, that are into music and what have you. But when we're talking about media houses that are news-based, it is the duty of such stations to be balanced. And that comes into the kind of professionals that you bring. It doesn't matter whose ox is God. You won't say because you are state-owned, not hear the opinion of those who are against or who seems to be different from what the state government or the federal government per time is doing. And that is where they have issues. Look at most of the state-owned and federal government-owned stations. They lack followership because you can predict what you will listen to on such stations. You can predict what you will hear. You can, the same news item, the same news material that is used in another station, by the time it will be coined and colored on the state-owned station, you begin to ask yourself, is this different from the same event that was reported on those other station? Because they want to tailor it in such a way that it suits the government, and it should not be. The essence of journalism is balance. You must balance your stories. It doesn't matter whether it affects the government or not. And that is why a lot of investment, that's where I think I have issues. A lot of investment that goes into these radio, television stations owned by the state are not worth it. Maybe on that basis, we can ask state government and federal government to stay away from broadcast business because it has also become a tool for embezzling money. You hear millions of naira being voted into their media houses, and you begin to wonder, where is the effect of that money? You enter their studio, you cannot even tell whether you are in a TV studio, you are in a radio studio, or you are in the room of one undergraduate student, the way the whole thing is put together. And then you hear the figures that goes into the management of that place, and you wonder, how can you sink this amount of money into this place and it will not have an effect? You see 4 people doing the work of 1 person. The question is, if it had been in private practice, would you ask 4 people, 5 people to do the work of 1 person? But because it's a state-owned, Yorubas will say, Ogota, so everybody does its own thing. So I think these are issues. If you look at it from that dimension, we can probably ask governments to stay off the ownership of media houses. But then they won't, because they need such tool to propagate their agendas.
All right. The persecution of journalists has been a recurring theme in Nigeria in the 90s, even in the current setup. Agba Jalingo readily comes to mind, and some other persons who have been going through persecution in the course of legitimately discharging their duties. Do you think that regarding press freedom, we should still be having all of those issues?
We shouldn't be having it. And I think that speaks more to us as practitioners in this field. We do not seek to protect ourselves. We are the one that will report laws bills being put in place in the National Assembly against people with disability, against this. But I doubt if journalists as a body has come up to say, look, we want this kind of law promulgated to protect us. And that happens a lot. I was with a senior journalist a couple of days ago. The popular Ni Babade has worked with Reuters, worked with CNN and the rest of them. And he was practically lamenting because all over his body you see gun wounds. He has been on the war fronts to cover news and all of that. He was telling you that, look, it's been 15 years and I still have bullets in my body and all of that. So the question would be, all of those years that he was on that field doing his legitimate duty, risking his life, now he's out of the job. He's now a senior colleague, so to say, who probably only goes around now to deliver papers, lectures, and what have you. What is the responsibility of the government and the society that he has served over those years on him now? So what encouragement are you giving to the younger ones? Agbaja Lingo is a friend. He's also a journalist and a civil rights activist in his own right. And each time I hear of his persecution or I watch him being thrown in and out of prison, and I have to speak with him on the phone, I tell him, Agba, man, be mindful of what happens to you 10, 15 years after, because we live in a society where hard work is not appreciated. I'm not saying people should not give their best, but they have made it so bad that there are no laws protecting journalists. We have laws protecting politicians. They will tell you a governor has immunity for the period of time he's in office. He can do and undo. He faces the music later. So what happens to journalists when they're in the course of their profession? What law protects us when we go on battlefields to cover stories? They will tell you, no, one of the rules is that journalists are not supposed to be attacked and warfield. Does war understand all of these things? So the question is, when they even fall or they suffer injury in the course of discharge of their duty in war fronts, in political gatherings, and what have you, what is the law or what is the provision made available for them? So I think as journalists, we need to begin to also ask questions on issues that concern us. As much as we report incidences, as much as we report issues, we should also be demanding protection from the political class, particularly the legislature at this time. I've been seeing situations, even here, when some people do not just like the face of one journalist because they feel he's tilted to one party or another. And then he finds himself going on reportage at a political gathering, and everybody descend on him because they see that as an avenue to vent their anger against such a person, and nobody will hold them responsible. And then maybe he comes back with a broken hand or a broken leg. There's a limit to what the employer can do, because there are no enabling laws that states particularly what needs to be done. I don't see a reason why journalists should not be protected by law in such a case that, look, when you are in the course of your duty and you suffer attack or harm, there should be free health care service for the period of time you are in service. All of these things are important. There should be protection in the legal system for journalists in the course of duty, so that could serve as an encouragement to journalists and will help them to also know that, look, once I do my job diligently, not minding whose ox is God, I am protected. But when you know that, look, one politician can throw you with one finger of his hand and throw you behind the bars or do what have you to you, there is this restraint humanly that comes to you that, look, while I'm doing this job, I also have my life to live. But when you know that there are laws that protect you, there are laws that guides your profession, there are things put in place to caution whatever affects you, whatever you suffer in the course of the work, I think it will be a lot for journalists, and it's something that needs to be looked into and done to protect people in this profession.
We're talking about protection now. Do you also think that the media owners have failed in protecting? We know that the government sometimes can be high-handed, politicians can be high-handed, but there are cases of journalists working on stories and, very serious stories, and there's some sort of backlash, some sort of, pushback from the concerned persons, and the owners just leave them out to dry like that. So what's the place of ownership in enshrining press freedom?
Number one is that, for me, a lot of people have argued otherwise, that, look, we need to have as many radio and TV stations, but for me, it is becoming a marketplace. Every day, a lot of media house owners now that have no business there. They have no background in the media. They have no background as a journalist. They just have some money at hand, and then they go buy licenses, because that's the word. Many of the time, they buy licenses. They buy the license, and the next thing, you see a building spring up, and they tell you it's Kiniko radio station, it's so TV station. So first and foremost, there should be a law put in place to prevent non-actors in the media industry from owning media houses. There are a lot of senior advocates of Nigeria now, a lot of businessmen, a lot of politicians that own radio and television stations. It shouldn't be. It should be guided in such a way that for you to own a radio station or a television station or a print medium, you must be a practitioner, or you must have an history in the media. You cannot give what you don't have. I don't want to use the word unfortunate, but I've worked in such radio and TV houses where the owners do not understand the tenets of the job. For them, it is about the profit. For them, it is about the pride of ownership. So when you even want to do what is professionally advisable, they will tell you, no, I don't want it. And then you either take a walk or you bow to their caprices because they are the ones that are paying the bill. So first and foremost, it's important that we guide the ownership of radio, television, and print mediums. That's number one. Number two is for those who eventually get to own media houses, there need to be minimum standards set. Look, it is funny. There are media houses where their staff gets paid less than primary school and secondary school teachers. It will sound impossible, but it's the truth. There are media houses that I know in Ibadan that pays as less as 25,000 naira to their staff. And then you wonder, with all the risk involved, with all the name, people see you on TV, people hear your name on radio and they assume, oh, he must be a big boy, he must be a big lady. And then you cannot even go back and tell them this is how much I earn. Because they will ask you, why don't you go and pick chalk and be teaching in one primary school? With due respect to teachers, I'm a trade one. So these are issues. So it is important, apart from, but if you see someone who understands, maybe somebody who comes from that background and then end up establishing a media houses like your proprietor is, there is this understanding that comes with the need to treat the staff right. Because such a person has such background. He or she knows what he has passed through in the course of growth before owning one. Number two, there must be laws that make some things just the minimum in the industry. So one of such laws is what the NUJ is trying to do now, that you must be a professional to even practice journalism. Because what we have is junk individuals finding themselves into the media because they just understand language and you could speak sweetly, and the next thing you are behind the camera or you are behind the microphone saying what you don't even have an understanding of. I think the NUJ is doing much about that now to regulate and ensure that, look, it must be professionals in that field. You must, if you don't have professional qualification, go and get one. That is number one. Number two, there must be minimum standard for those who are practicing journalism. For example, just like we have minimum wage in the civil service, there must be something minimum that you know that, look, it doesn't matter, even if your studio is located in the remotest part of the country, this is the minimum that your staff should earn. Look, one of the things that makes journalism beautiful when I got attracted to it and decided to have a career in it, when you get to broadcast houses, you see, except for now, only then, some 20 years ago, only can you find a broadcast house without a recreational center within the premises where you can take some bottles, do your things after work and all of that. It helps staffs of such places to bond, because you only have a social life as a journalist. You resume probably in the morning, you do a shift, you think, if I go home now for my next shift, I may not be able to make it, so you stay back. There's things that needs to make that job comfortable. Minimum standards should be put in place. Number three is that for journalists, they also deserve some measure of standard of living. It's not just about salary. There are things that the profession puts on you that your salary cannot take or cannot provide for. For example, for especially the people in the radio are a little bit lucky. You can decide to put on a knicker and a palm sander and what have you, and what the people hear is just the voice. They don't know what you look like. But for those of you who are behind the cameras, you are faced with challenges of procuring new clothes every day, because by the time you wear the same cloth 2-3 times, people will tell you, I guess that guy does not have any other suits. Yeah. I don't think she has more than that one gown. So you are forced to get more clothes, get more shoes, for ladies, get more hairs and all of that. How much of this is being provided for by the employers? In those days, it used to be a TV station having a costume room where you can have your size of suits. So even if you come home from home with whatever, you can walk into the dressing room, pick a suit that suits you. But these days, nobody will likely do that. Why should I wear a suit that somebody wore yesterday? I don't know what his health challenges are. I don't know how neat he is and all of that. So some of these things, time has overshadowed them. So there's a need to make provision, extra provision, for those who are involved in the people behind the camera are lucky. It doesn't look, nobody cares what you wear. But there must be special protection and special provisions for those that get to do one thing or the other that put them on the spotlight in the media industry. It's quite very important.
So how do we go about protecting journalists from the politicians? That's another angle. If you write a story, I was having a conversation with some of my colleagues yesterday. If you write a story that does not suit the government in power, you're automatically tagged a member of the opposition. If you write a story that does not suit the opposition, you're tagged a member of the ruling party. Do journalists need to be mindful of what people tag them as, and how do we protect them?
First and foremost, it is important for the journalists themselves to know who and what they are. Look, journalists are like pastors. You are expected to be the friend of all, but that does not take away your personal biases. But in a situation where you see, with due respect, when you see journalists go caps in hand to the homes of politicians to beg, you want to do your child naming, it is politician from A divide or B divide that you write to seeking help, you want to go to school, they are seeking help from them, they automatically expect something from you. It's the normal rule of life. Of course, we will have needs, but that's why I talk about special care for journalists. The job puts you in a position whereby you cannot afford to do some things. There are some favors you cannot seek, because you know that once you seek such favors, you are bound to play the tune of such persons. And when you don't, they either see you as an ingrate, or they see you as, oh, maybe as he's collecting from me, he's also collecting from the other side. So by the virtue of the kind of job you do, there are some favors you cannot seek. And that is why the job needs to be able to provide what is enough for you. Because the moment you are too close to a particular politician, naturally, such a person expects some favor or some concerns from you that might not necessarily align with the provision of the job that you are taking. So first and foremost, journalists need to protect themselves against being tagged. And the way you protect yourself against being tagged is not seeking unnecessary favor or not being unnecessarily close to one person or the other. That doesn't mean you cannot have a relationship. But the moment today they see you in the house of this person, next tomorrow they see you there, even if it's your uncle, even if it's your father, an average person on the street will say, oh, don't mind him. Why won't he support him when he's on radio or TV? Go to his house 8 a.m. tomorrow, you will meet him there. The job inhibits you from being able to do something. That's number one. Number two is that there needs to be a law, a legal framework in place to protect journalists. There should be no reason why journalists should be held responsible for what he says or what she says on radio or TV. Just like on the floor of the National Assembly or the State Assembly, there is a law that protects members of the National Assembly and the State Assembly about whatever they say in the chamber. There should be a law also that protects journalists in that way, that once you are on set or once you are on radio, whatever is said, you are protected and immune from prosecution about it. So that there will be this confidence that comes with, I'm doing my job, not when you know that your job can land you in Kirikiri the next day, or when you know that whatever you say on here can be used against you the next month. So I advocate that there should be a law in place that protects media practitioners while they are in the course of their job. When you go to beer parlor, whatever you like you say there, you can be held responsible. But whatever you say on the course of duty should be such that you are immune from. Another thing that needs to be put in place to protect journalists from politicians is to ensure that media house owners do not have unfettered influence on the stations. Without mentioning names, there are stations that when you mention them, they'll tell you, oh, they work for PDP now. There are some stations that when their name is mentioned, they will tell you, those ones are APC apologists. When you mention this particular station, they will tell you. And the reason why such stations are tagged as such is by the influence of their proprietors. So just like we are seeking law to protect practitioners from being prosecuted by what they say while on here, there should also be a law that makes it impossible for non-media actors to own radio and television stations. In such way, it will be perfectly professional. And the last thing that comes to mind in protecting journalists from politicians is to ensure that whatever politicians do, they are not allowed to have unbearing influences, especially on the editors, both in the print and in the broadcast, because that happens a lot. It's funny when you hear that a particular politician invites all the editors of the media houses or what have you, and then you wonder, you invite editors for meetings, they are leaving the place, you are thank you for coming, 500,000, 1 million. But those journalists who are scattered across the different states of the federation, or who are covering one beat, covering crime, covering sports, covering what, nobody cares about them. What the duty of an editor is to vet whatever comes in from reporters before it goes on air, before it goes into print. But they are the one that politicians have a lot of influence on, because they know they can use them to kill stories. So there is a need to put a law in place such that as a reporter, when you feel your story is not properly used, or when you feel that your story has been unduly vetted or influenced, there should be a law that makes it possible for you to be able to challenge your superior, that look, okay, I don't care what your opinion is, I don't care whatever might have happened that I'm not aware of, but this is not the content of this story. But if you try that in some media houses now, you should be on the street looking for a job the following day. So this needs to be done to ensure that people are able to do their job without fear or favor. All
right, thank you so much for your time this morning, Comrade Ayo Ologun, who is a journalist, a human rights activist, and socio-political commentator. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's the first leg of the interview. Thank you for staying with us. We'll be back with our next guest.
Arrested, affected, sound, found. What do we see? What do we say? Flowing from a spring. A fact A to Z. Check and confirm. Ever expounding current events. Traveling down from the business gist to the globally arising happenings, to the sports news, to the bittersweet infos. Guided transmission, even diffusion, vast and fast, detailed facts are fled. Within seconds, nuggets of words that flew across borders are fired. Stories short and long, wrapped in bundles of words, broken and dissected as it is, except misheard. This is the news as it is.
This iconic African presents the narrative of a man destined to exert an imperishable global influence in Western education. His was a story of a freeborn, captured and sold.
All right, welcome back to the show. It's still Morning Spring on Western Spring Television, and we'll have joining us a legal practitioner, human rights activist, Barrister Moses Obadi. John, thank you for your time on the show this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right. So what are the constitutional provisions for the protection of pressmen in Nigeria?
Well, the provisions for the protection of journalists, we take it from Section 22 of Nigerian Constitution, which gives the journalist the rights to cover, to express, to discuss, to inform, educate. And so in the process of doing their work, there are other areas where they have to be very careful. And that has to be issue of maybe libel. So because if you are going to pass a particular information to the public, you must be very careful that it's not libelous. And where it is so, the person you might have written or read something about has a right to react. And there are always options, either for you to withdraw such a publication, to apologize, or to do the needful. But however, the reason happening is not because the journalist has either libeled, it's because the political class have become hyper insensitive. They do not want you to expose, they do not want you to even give the normal information out. I remember Decree 4 of 1984, where Buhari was then the head of state, even said that even when you report the truth, that you could go in for it. And indeed, some journalists in The Guardian were arrested and prosecuted and jailed, even for passing out correct information. So that is why it was said the journalists, it's not only in our country, across the globe. Remember, in this Ukraine-Russia war, some were arrested, some were detained, some unfortunately killed. And during the Katrina, storm 2, some has to, hazardously died as a result. So the life of an average journalist is under threats because of the hazards of the job. So you have to be very careful. You have to be watchful. But then, if you want to make name in this job, just write. You have to investigate because it's part of your job. Right? That's what we call investigative journalism. And in the process of investigation, there are other things that you have to be sure of your facts. You have to back up with evidence, and you should be able to call witnesses in case where the state is alleging that what you have done is improper. So the journalist has his duty protected, guided, but then the state, one of the things in journalism is that fact is sacred and comment is free. So once you know that your fact is sacred, go ahead, publish, and be done. And I remember years back, particularly around 2009, I was covering for the news magazine. And there was this end of the year report by a particular private sector in Edo State, and that the Okomu palm oil in particular. And so when they were doing the report, they said they've done this one, they build hospital, they build school and roads. And somebody from that community in Okada area said, no, that's not true. I said, are you sure you're fine? He said, yes. I said, what will happen if you, he said, if you can, I'll back you up, sir. So we charter a taxi. And before you to be able to cross to where those people said they build school, they build road and that kind of thing, you have to be pass through about 3 places. You have the police, we have the army, and you must not go with camera. And so when I know the implication of what I'm doing, I have to go with camera hidden my private parts. It's not the day of the phone, remember? Mm-hmm. So when we get to there, go to the checking point, you have to come down to the vehicle, you raise up your hand, you can't anything. I remember it's where I hid my own camera, and I beat the security. I got to Okomu palm oil, and I went around the area. There's no any roads, no hospital. In fact, the people in those areas were coming from Undo. They had to pass through Kano to arrive at that place. So I did everything good job. In fact, they even suspect me, say, this man is not a familiar man. They say, yeah, he's one of our village men. He's all returning home. So when I got my story, get them ready. If you want, Otitoju is now in TVC, was my editor in the news magazine. Send my story there. And then I remember 1, 2 of them, the thing was not coming. So I called Otitoju. I said, sir, I've not seen my vocation. He said, the man I called in Germany, which is the head of that Okomo, has called Ononuga, who is our GM, and told them that, please, your man has got this one, want that story killed. And that was the end of the story. So now look at the risk I took. If the soldier got that I beat them with that camera, my life may go for it. But then, if you want to make it, you have to go beyond just go to community and get a report. You must do something to do. Your own is to find out. And if it is to go and be damned, but fact is sacred and comment is free.
All right. Yesterday being World Press Freedom Day, and with what journalists are facing now, how much of press freedom do you think, is in play in the Nigerian space today, especially looking at it in light of all the hazards that journalists face in the society?
Like I said to you, that an average politician does not want his activity published, especially in developed country. That I said it's not new. You remember the guy in the Cross River, what's his name now, who was arrested by the Ayade. That would be Agbajalingo. Agbajalingo, and many of them. Then you remember there's a guy who was killed during the Abacha days in Alausa, and is it Kakafo or something that way, and many other who have been. So whenever there is no rule of law, don't expect the journalists to practice effectively, because the same thing that will not allow an individual to enjoy his right will also tamper with the journalist in the process of doing his duty. Because number one, in a corrupt society, or in a society which seems to have not been encouraging open or accountability, where people are not accountable for the resources, the utilizations, definitely they want to cover up. And you want to show you, as far as they are concerned, you are not a friend. Because they see you as somebody who's populosing. They say, don't let that man know. Tell him I'm not around. But if you are going to praise them, do that, this is the man of the century, that kind of thing, you do badly for them, no problem. But once you said that the budget approved for so and so year, a certain percentage has not been utilized, and that the same was repeated, this, and you are able to back up, you go to that, you interview this and that kind of thing, no governor will praise you. In fact, by the time they say, this stupid man. So these are some of the things that created, the relation between you and the public office holder. But in an area where there's accountability, where things are done properly, you are a friend because you have a job and you are doing your job. Your own is to inform, entertain, educate, and possibly publish. So if in the process of doing your job, and you're also you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to hide. So why should we be at loggerhead? But in a situation, a corrupt society, and I remember one of the principal officer in this administration at the federal level went to the CCB and said, don't let these people see my what I've declared as my assets. So how do you now go and nose and do that? Will it spare you? There have been instances where some journalists, they never knew where they... Remember the man was closed the other time in Abuja. By the time they discovered he was already dead. Because of one thing or the other, he has published or he has read. So if we are going by all that we're saying is that a journalist is doing a hazardous job if actually he wanted to make a record. But if you are in the entertainer, nobody bothers you. But if you are on the reportorial area, where you do investigative that has to do with the political class, don't expect them to smile. And don't expect them to give you, if they are at all. Let's even go back to the Ononuga mentioning the all these spokesperson for Bola Tinubu, including this man used to be editor of Concord. They are all together now.
Dele
Alake. These are people that suffer from the military. There are occasions where their publication will be taken totally and burnt. Some vehicle will be delayed because they know they were on to reporting issues. And remember, even at the Concord, I work in Concord at the point in time, there was a report that IBB, Ibrahim Babangida, gave some of the judicial officer vehicle, new Peugeot 505 them, in order to silence them on a particular issue. And Concord reported it. Back it with facts and the amount they bought the thing. Do you know they tried to kill the thing, they could not be killed because they were sure of their fact. And eventually they have to settle with MQ on that publication so they can stop it. So these are the area where you will know definitely you are not friends, but I say you are not enemy. You are doing your job, but you must do it with fact and figure. I was reading yesterday's this day online where somebody online might link a particular character. And by the time the judge go through, he say, yes, you actually did. And many other people pass some negative things. You don't malign character. And that's why you must be sure of your facts. You must cross-check to ensure that this thing you are publishing, especially your editor will call you and said, this story, are you sure? Have you asked this and that? So that by the time it's done, those people will come to back up your story. So definitely all over the world and in our country in particular, nobody will expect you not to do your job. But then the politician will not be your friend if you are the type that doesn't know, because sometimes they even offer you money. Please don't publish this one. Do this one and do that one. And so when they know you are the one they cannot buy, and then be expecting some challenges. And if you are in that position, you should not be a night crawler. There are some other places maybe socialize, you have to reduce it because those are the people they will send their boys to pick you up. So these are some of the cautions one has to take. But beyond it, there's nothing wrong being a journalist. It is a good job. It is something that gives you, because when you say your story published, and eventually those people begin to panic and say, how did they get this information? Your management, they'll be encouraged. I know our boy has gotten it. And it will give a boost to image. There's some newspaper, when you see the headline, you can know they are not fabricate. But there are some other newspapers who say, I have to cross-check. There's what we call filtration of information. When somebody give you, maybe somebody spies a message on social media today, don't just publish. Try and filter. How did they across? Is it possible for this budget to be approved in time like this? How did they do it? So you can cross those people there. Even if they are not, you say, we cross them, but we call them. But they said they will reach back to us later. That has saved you, that you have just gone and publish. So definitely, it is not a job to be scared of, but it's a job you have to take with caution.
Okay, so let me ask you now, do you think that improper remuneration, like poor remuneration, could make journalists susceptible to things that will infringe on their own freedom, like hobnobbing politicians, for instance?
Certainly. I remember a particular publication, is still on now, and the particular publication also has a television sister. And then one of his staff at Abuja, at the Aso Rock, said, "Sir, I've not been remunerated in the last 6 months." I said, "What are you talking? You hold my ID card. That ID card will open doors for you." And those who are listening know, I won't mention his name. And so some journalists decide to play the card and that compromise the standard because they were not well remunerated. So, but where you are well remunerated, even the journal, if an average person want to lobby and say, please drop that news, we will give you this, we will give you that. I say no. And yes, we know the money they're going to give you, you may not earn it in a year, but then you have your name to protect. If you also have somebody who has a vision, you know, one day you write your memo, you'll be able to bring and say, when I was covering this, this was. For example, I was telling you just what I did at Okomu while I was in Edo State. I was covering Edo and Delta. That was the period Oshomole was there. That was the period Udwa was in Delta. So, you know, it gave me the delight today to share the story today. But it was not palatable when you know we are going to a war zone. So the average people who owns most of these media houses, if you permit me, they are not generous. Some of them are stingy. Even when they pay you, you know it's not enough money. And that's why some people compromise. But then if you know, like American will say, if you cannot withhold the heat, get out of the kitchen. If you know that remuneration will make you to compromise, why stay? Why don't you move out? Why don't you do other things so that you can be a man of honor than selling out, you know, compromising the standard? So, but we also encourage those who own media houses that they too has once passed through this stage. They should be able to pay their staff. Give them some, you know, some maybe end of the year that will make them feel, I'm happy, they are doing us well. So that when there's a need for you to compromise, say, no, I am not. I'm not going to compromise. I'm being paid for the job I'm doing. So definitely, the journalists are not well remunerated, either private or in public. And that has been a challenge, not today. It has been an old story till today.
So how do we go about ensuring that even the public now, apart from the government and politicians, there are some misconceptions about journalists and the public that makes them susceptible to public outrage when they do their jobs. Some persons feel that the journalists aren't doing the job as they should do it, and journalists feel sometimes that I can't really put my life on the line because nothing comes out of it. We live in a society that doesn't reward, you know, diligence and all of that. How do you think the society should also be, you know, educated to see journalists as being on their side?
It depends on the philosophy of the organization you are representing. While I was around 10 years old, I started reading Daily Times. I live with an uncle. Every morning I'm always going to go and get it to him. So by the time I was going, I thought all newspapers are called Daily Times. Because as at that time, you get the correct information. And the public look towards them whenever they say, have you heard from Daily Times? And I remember years later when I was growing up, they said one man was from eastern part of the country when he came to Lagos. And whenever Zeke spoke, he would call it, even though he cannot say, Zeke or Kuka, that means Zeke has spoken. Because the philosophy of that paper was to inform, was to entertain, was to show the pictures of the leader in those days. So when an organization is the one that is friendly with the society. No matter whatever content is dishing out, the ruling class may not be favorable. But if the majority realize that the philosophy is towards them informing, I told you that, you're also practicing journalist, that a journalist inform, entertain, educate, corrects. So when you carry out all these ones, it's not the one that even sometimes you see those on the entertaining sector, like the one there used to be some Baba Jazz in those days and many other things, Lagos Weekend. That's all that they have fun. So in your publication, there must be an area where you touch the common mind in the street, so that they won't just see it as an elitist issue. But when you carve an image, like let's talk about like the economics, paper that deal with the economy. An average person doesn't know what goes on there. So if anything goes wrong with the man who comes to report that a percentage of Nigerian oil has been stolen and they won't bother. But if they say, that man that normally report that the governor ought to do the road that go to Otefu, that kind of thing, that they were harassing him at okay, something. And you say, I feel like it's our man, that kind of thing. So if you're writing or whatever publication you are representing is the people's paper, definitely they are going to be a sort of a rally round when they are challenging. But if you succeeded in entering into the politician as an enemy, and the politician are able to show and say these people, they do not want to, they only support a particular party, and that's why a publication, a media house must not be towards a particular political party or philosophical arms. You should be able to have everyone around as your customer, as the stakeholder. But then there are challenges. If the owner of your media house is owned by a politician, you realize you have to follow that philosophy. You have to go towards that area. And that's why in some area, and I'll give you an example. About 40 years ago, Concord has problem. Concord newspaper, the target was UPN and Awolowo. Those who are older, that will understand what I'm talking. And so the UPNs and Chief Awolowo has to address the problem and said, don't listen to this man. When you read this particular newspaper, you may not know the content because some of you were not born when the thing happened. There was this what we call the Coker Inquiry. The Coker Inquiry, according to Awolowo, I was a young man, I was already an undergraduate when he was talking to the people and said, I was in jail when the inquiry was conducted. They never invited me, they didn't listen to me, and they brought the thing as a report. That this paper is now publishing it to you, that some of you, because you are young, they will misinform you. Do you see the implication? So for us, as a young man that time, we were not reading Concord. And then those who are followers has to read Tribune. So these are the area where when you are reporting and you want the populace, you should be able to ask, this paper I'm representing, are they people's oriented? Are we biased towards a particular party? So today, things are matured. Most of the private media houses are owned by individuals who are not partisan. And even if they are partisan, they don't carry it on their faces. They try to balance whatever information they are doing. So if you are the one that balance your information, if you are the one that pass the correct information without leaning to a particular party, you won't have challenges. And that is why you should be able, like you about said, Tabaron Nisheru, Afitomoje. So even if the owner of the one said, go for my party, you should be able to do in a way that your life will be safe, your career will also be protected. So in doing it, you must be able to balance your reporting. Like when I said I was representing the news in Edo State, I will go to Shomilia, take for him. I will also go to the chairman of PDP and report. By the time the thing came up, I tried to balance it. And some of them will have to even call me and say, we appreciate, take this one for your transport. So these are the way to do it. So if you want the public to be on your side.
All right, so thank you so much for your time this morning. Pastor Moses Obaditon, journalist, former journalist now, you're no longer practicing, but now a legal practitioner and human rights activist. Thank you for your time on the show this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so that's where we end the interview segment. I'll be back to give you the cutting down to size of Wike by Bola Ahmed Tinubu in Rivers State yesterday, but Temitope will be stepping aside.
Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Temitope Ajijola. Have a nice day.